Hello everybody. Welcome to today's Appeon Community Webinar. This webinar will focus on new REST-related features of PowerBuilder 2017 R3. New enhancements have been made to JSON, as well as the introduction of OAuthClient. These features should help complete the RESTClient features of PowerBuilder so that your applications can move to the cloud. Today's community presenter is Bruce Armstrong, a longtime PowerBuilder developer and also an Appeon MVP. Before we turn it over to Bruce, I'd like to point out that this is a volunteer-based Appeon community presentation. As such, the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are not necessarily those of Appeon, and Appeon has not reviewed the content for accuracy. All right, so without further ado, we'll turn it over to Bruce.
Okay, thanks, Armin. First thing we're going to do is go over the agenda, and the first thing I'll do there is talk about myself for a little bit, who I am, why you might care what I have to say about PowerBuilder. Then we're going to talk about two different main features that were enhanced in as far as REST in R3, PowerBuilder 2017 R3. The first has to do with JSON, and we're going to talk about the couple different formats of JSON that are supported now, how we export JSON, how we import JSON, how we do merge and extract of JSON, and I'll explain what that's about when we get there. And then the other main category we're going to look at is OAuth, which is the method of authenticating REST web services. Then we'll have a question and answer session. So first, a little bit about me. I've been around PowerBuilder for a long time, looks like about 30 years now. Started with 1OB. Shortly after I got familiar with PowerBuilder, I started doing independent contracting. I did that for 15 years, and then 14 years ago, I went with a company called Integrated Data Services. I'll talk about them in a minute. But where you probably know me from is either because of the PowerBuilder Developers Journal, which was a magazine dedicated to PowerBuilder. I was the editor of that for quite a few years, wrote a large number of articles in that. I was also been active in PowerBuilder online forums for quite a while, including the current Appeon community. But back in the early days, they had the PowerSoft forums on CompuServe, and then the Site-based NNTP groups. I was active in all those. In fact, I was made a member of what they called Team PowerSoft, which became Team Sybase, and then an SAP mentor, as PowerBuilder got owned by different companies. During that time, I wrote a couple books on PowerBuilder, or helped write a couple books on PowerBuilder, and I do a lot of user group presentations, presentations at Elevate, and then webinars like this one right here, where I share information about PowerBuilder. The company I work for, as I mentioned, is called Integrated Data Services. When I started with them 14 years ago, their bread and butter application was a PowerBuilder application, client-server application they marketed. They've since moved that application to a web technology, and most of the applications we do now are web-based. However, we do have a number of customers who still prefer to use the client-server version, so we are actively still doing PowerBuilder development for those customers. Enough about me and the company. Let's talk about some of these new REST features. Let's start with JSON. So there's two different formats of JSON that are supported in PowerBuilder 2017 R3. The first one is what's called simple JSON, and that's just the JSON that you typically see anywhere. It's name value pairs, structures and arrays of such pairs. If you're exporting data from a data window, it's going to typically be arrays of such pairs. It won't be structures. The other item is the other format, I should say, is data window standard JSON. So it's not just the data; it's metadata about the data. In other words, it will have row and column statuses. It will have the original and modified values. It will have metadata about the columns. What it is it's everything you need if you wanted to take data that had been modified on the client by the user, and you wanted to send it up to the server, and you wanted the server to be able to process the updates to that data through the data window as if the changes have been made on the server somehow. So if back in the distributed PowerBuilder days, we had a set of functions called setFullState, getFullState that captured that same kind of information. It got not just the data, but what had changed, what the original values were. It was shipped across the wire in this distributed PowerBuilder environment. And then the server component would apply the update as if it had been, as if the client had been directly connected to the database. So it was a great way of doing distributed PowerBuilder applications. The problem with that approach in the distributed PowerBuilder days is that blob that we got from these two functions, setFullState, getFullState, that blob couldn't be read by other applications. It was closed, it was proprietary. Now that we have the simple DataWindow JSON, we have this open format, which is based on an internet standard. And so that we're no longer tied to a proprietary method of transporting the data. So this is an example of what simple JSON looks like. Once again, it's just name value pairs. This is an example or at a fairly high level of what standard DataWindow JSON looks like. So there's an identity value, there's a version, there's information about the data object, including the name of the data object, there's metadata about the columns, and then you've got basically 4 buffers here: the primary, filter, and delete buffers for the data window, and also entering information from any child data windows in the main data window. And then for each of these buffers, there's a series of rows, and each of those rows will have a row status, and for each of those rows there'll be a set of columns. There'll be a column status for each column, and then if there's been any modifications, it will have the original and modified values as well. So this is an example of what some of that column metadata looks like. This is the row data, so there's your row status, here's your column status, here's your current and original values. This is how the data is actually stored for each row. So now we've got 2 different formats of JSON. How do we get that out of the data window? How do we export it? Well, there's one method, but it's got a whole bunch of variations on about how you call it. It's called export JSON. The Boolean argument that's on each of these indicates whether you want the simple JSON or the data window standard JSON. For this first one, that's all you're providing, and what you get is all the data in the primary buffer in the particular format you asked for. The second version, this allows you to indicate that you want the data for a specific buffer, either primary, filter, deleted, or data window children, I imagine. The Boolean here indicates whether you want all the rows that were in that particular buffer, or only the rows in that buffer that actually have changes in them. So if you've sent 10,000 rows from the server down to the client, and the user updates 1, you don't have to send all 10,000 back. You just send back the 1 row the user actually changed. This third method has flags for each of the buffers. So there's one for primary, one for filter, one for delete, and one for the data window children. So you can get the data from multiple buffers this way, just by passing true for whichever buffer you want the actual data out of. And then finally, this last one allows you to specify one buffer, but it allows you to specify starting and end rows and starting and end columns. So if there's only a certain subset of the data that's in the data window that you actually want in the JSON, you can use this version of the function just to get that subset of the data. So that's how we get it out of the data window. So let's say we've retrieved some data up on the server. We use our export method. We send it down to the client. What's the client going to do with it? Well, it wants to import it. So there's one version of that function. It just has a bunch of optional arguments. So it's import JSON. The only thing you have to provide is the JSON. Now there's no Boolean flag here for the format, because the data window can figure out when it sees the data which format it is. You don't need to tell it which format you're sending. So there's no argument needed for that. Now the string error, that's a function, an argument that we're going to pass by reference. It's like the data pipeline. In the data pipeline, if you pass a string by reference to the pipeline, it will return any error information that occurred during the data pipeline transfer. And so the same thing with this import JSON. If you pass a string by reference here, it's going to return back to you in that string the error information about what might have gone wrong in the import if something went wrong. Once again, that's optional. All the rest of these arguments are optional. You can specify a particular data buffer that you want to import the data into, and you can include start and end row or start and end column in case you've got a JSON that's got a lot of data in it and you only want a subset of that data to be imported. That's what you would use that for. So that gets the data back into the data window on our, let's say, on our client side. So what's the merge and extract about? Well, let's say that you've got a window you're showing on the client and it actually has 4 data windows in it. You don't want to do 4 separate REST calls to the server because REST calls are an expensive operation. What you'd like to be able to do if possible is make one call and get all 4 data sets back at once. And that's what the merge and extract does. You merge the data set on one end, send the entire data set as one block of data to the other end, and then the other end parses the data back out or extracts it back out into the individual data sets. So that the primary use, as I mentioned here, is we want to reduce the number of calls that we make between the server and the client because the calls are so expensive time-wise. So how do we do this? Well, there's 4 methods here. What we do, first of all, is we take our JSON packager object and we do a set value on it for each data set that we want to include in the large block of data. There's a couple different versions of the set value. If we've already extracted, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that word. If we already exported the JSON from the data window, we already have the blob with the JSON in it. What we could do is use set value, give it the key, and then pass in the JSON itself. The other thing we might want to do, though, if we haven't got the JSON yet, is we can use this second version of the function, which will export the JSON for us. So we say set value, key, and we pass in either a data window control or a data window data store, either one. And it will extract the JSON from the data window or the data store and add it to the JSON packager. So now we've done this, set value, let's say 4 times, so we've got all 4 sets of data in our JSON packager. Then we use either the get JSON blob or the get JSON string to get the larger block of data out of the JSON packager. That's what we send up or down the wire to the other end. Once that data is on the other side, we're going to take that big block of data and we're going to take another JSON packager and we're going to do a load string on it. That gets all that big block of data into the JSON packager. Now we can do a get value on the receiving side, and we take the key. Now the key is just a term you're going to use to identify each of the data sets. So this might be employee or departments or just something that represents the data. So on the client side, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to say get value employees, and you'll get the employees data set out of the larger data set, and then you do that for each of the different data sets. So I've got an example of what this looks like. This is actually the Booktown database that O'Reilly provided as a sample for when you're doing PostgreSQL. It was from one of their books on PostgreSQL, and I used that for my Postgres SQL demos for PowerBuilder. So what I'm doing, go back here. What I've got here is I've got a drop down that indicates what format I want the JSON in, either the simple or the standard data window. And then I look at that and then generate the JSON down here when you click on the export button. Then when you do the import, I clear this data window and import the JSON back in. And then for the merge and extract, what I do is I have a data store. This happens to be all the title information in this Booktown database. I also have a data store that has the author information. In the merge, I take those two data sets, put them together, show them down here, and then the extract, I take that larger data set and I pull the author information back out and paste it in here. So here I'm just using the XPower JSON, the first one, where I'm just pulling a Boolean flag. This format value is set by the drop-down. I just go ahead and just grab that JSON, stick it in the MLE, and I'm done. And the import's pretty simple too. I do a reset of the original data window, just so you see there's no smoke and mirrors going on. I've really done an import. And then I import the text directly out of the MLE back into the data window. This is an example of doing the merge. So this is our JSON packager. And then I'm creating a data store. I'm retrieving the authors into the data store. I'm using the version of set value that retrieves the JSON directly from either the data window or the data store, and then so those are just my titles of my data sets, books and authors. I do the get JSON string and I just paste that into the MLE. And then finally, when I want to extract that JSON back out, I create another JSON package object, load the MLE back into it, do a get value on the authors, and just display that in the MLE. So let's go and see what that actually looks like. So here, that's my sample database once again. This is the simple JSON format. So once again, just name value pairs. It's just raw data. Okay. But if I change this to the data window standard format and export it, now we see a lot more information. So if you look down here, row status, there's a row status right there. You don't see original modified values down here or column statuses because I didn't actually change any data here yet. If I changed some data up here, you would see the column statuses and original modified row values. And let's import that back. Once again, bing, I've cleared the data window, and now I've imported that JSON, in this case in the data window standard format, back into the data window. Now if this had that status information in it, this data window would actually, if you did get item status on the rows and columns in this data window, you would see those statuses that got transmitted over the wire. This is the merge. So now I have that title, books, and then there's that simple JSON. That's the book information. And then if I scroll down here a little bit, we see authors. There it is. It's starting right there. That's the closed bracket from the end of the array of title information. And then this is my authors. Once again, the simple JSON with the authors in it. Now I do an extract, and what I get is, I don't get the authors at the beginning because that was just the key. This is the author data that was in the data store that I've extracted back out. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's go back to the slides, and we'll talk about OAuth. So OAuth, as I mentioned earlier, is basically the standard, pretty much the pretty wide standard for doing authentication. And so there's a new object in PowerBuilder 2017 R3 called the OAuthClient object. It has a couple of different methods. There is an access token method and a request resource method. The access token gets the token, okay, the OAuth token. So there's a token request object you send in that has, and this object contains usually like an ID value and a key that you received from the service that you want to call. This token response has the actual token. You call this once. You call this the request resource. You call that many times. You don't keep calling the access token over and over again. You've already got your token. It's good for a certain amount of time, and while it's good, you can keep making that the second call over and over again until that token expires. Now, how long it takes for the token to expire depends on the service you're calling. In the case of Twitter, which I use for my demo, they don't actually expire tokens. You could keep using them over and over again forever. So this is how I'm going to use it for my demo here. I'm going to access Twitter, and so I go to the apps.twitter.com site and I create an application for my account. Now, there's a couple different ways that an application can access Twitter. It can do it as a user, or it can do it as an application. Now, if it does it as a user, there's usually a additional step you have to do where the Twitter asks the user to authorize the app to act on its behalf. And that's a little bit more than I wanted to get into for my demo. So I use the second approach, where it's not representing the user, the app is just representing itself. It does mean that I have a lot less I can do. I can't post tweets because I'm not a user. If you wanted to post tweets, you would have to log in as, representing a user. With authenticating as an application, all I can do is search for tweets and read them. As an example of applications that allow you to log in as a user, I use Buffer and Flipboard, specifically to deal with Twitter, where they do Buffer does posting on my behalf. Flipboard actually does reading on my behalf. I imagine it does posting as well, but I don't use it for that. So this is what the apps.twitter.com page looks like. I've gone in, I've created this sample application called Elevate Demo. There's several tabs up here. This third tab says Keys and Access Tokens. Once you've created the app, that's where you go to get the ID and key that you're going to use to access it, Twitter from the application. So the process flow for OAuth is pretty simple. You have this consumer ID and consumer secret, which are essentially a username and password, but they're for your app. You then concatenate them together with a colon between them, and then you base 64 encode that value. That's how you do basic authentication. So you concatenate them together with a colon between them. Base 64 encode that value. You send that as a request header with the word basic in front of it, and then if that authenticates on the server, they send the token down. Now, you don't have to worry about these steps. This is just informational. When you set up the token request object, it takes care of all of this for you. So this graphic actually comes from Twitter. So you can see where you're doing essentially the basic authentication to Twitter. Twitter sends you back this access token, and then you call this part over and over again. You see that loop there. So once you've got the access token, you just send it up with this bearer header in the authorization header, this bearer tag in the authorization header, and you can just keep calling that forever. Once again, this is just for informational. This is what PowerBuilder takes care of for you. Where you just ask for the token, you get the token back, and you just start sending requests. So this is what it looks like. This is the little sample application I've written. I'm searching for the term, pound PowerBuilder, and I just take the raw JSON and dump it back into the MLA here. So there's two tokens. One requests the access token. We do that once. The other one actually does the searches. We can do that over and over again. So here's what the code looks like. I open up a window where you provide your OAuth credentials. There's a couple different grant types you can make in the request. We're doing client credentials in this case. Then some of this is you have to look at the documentation for the site you're calling to determine what to provide. It's normally going to be a post method call. This is the location that Twitter says that you need to call. And then I found that we need to do a set header on. It didn't really matter what the header was set for, but we had to do a set header for user agent on the request, or Twitter would ignore it, likely to prevent being spammed with OAuth requests, invalid OAuth requests intended to take the server down or something. So then we create the OAuth client. We submit our access token request. I pop open a window here that basically just shows you what we got back. So if you're interested in all the details, we grab the access token, which we're going to use later. I included timeout and secure protocol in that code. I actually set them to the default values. Timeout is in seconds. The default is 60, and you can set it to 0 for an infinite timeout. The secure protocol defaults to 0, and what that means is that it will start with TLS 1.2, and it will try to contact the server. If the server doesn't support 1.2, it will step down to 1.1 and try again, and it just keeps stepping down until it finds a secure protocol that the server knows how to handle. If you know that the service you're calling handles a specific format as its top one, let's say TLS 1.0, you could use this secure protocol to say start with that. Don't or actually just use that. Don't try to step through the different protocols till you find out which one it supports. So once again, you set the client ID and client secrets. We're sending the grant type to client credentials, and we're doing a post request. This all came from the Twitter site. This is an example of what it looks like. The consumer key and the secret I got from the Twitter site when I set up my application. So this is the one where they have the credentials. Not a whole lot to look at here. Basically, just grab the values out of the SLAs and send it back. This is an example of what it looks like when we get the information back. These are all the properties of the response, the token response. The main thing we're interested in here is the access token, but this is the full body of the response. The expires indicates how long the token is good for. In this case, 0 meaning infinite. The status code, usually 200, indicates it worked. Something else means something went wrong. The status text is sort of the English or equivalent of what the status code means. And this is the token type we got back, which we need to deal with when we send the token, but PowerBuilder does that for us. If there is an error getting the token, then you would get some information down here as well, indicating hopefully what went wrong. So this is what it looks like now. Once we've got our, well, this is when I've got the response code, and I'm just populating the values from the response into the different SLAs. And one thing I note here, the response body, that's not it. Never mind. Okay. This is when we're going to do our search now. So I'm doing a get because that's what Twitter told me I need to do. Once again, secure protocol and timeout are set to their default values. That's just so you know they're available. The URL, once again, is this is from the Twitter documentation. If I'm going to search for tweets, that's the URL I pass. along with the search term I'm looking for. And once again, I found that if I didn't do a set header for user agent, Twitter would ignore my requests, so I'm doing the set header. I'm setting the access token for the request. This is what I got back from the access token method. I'm creating a client and then sending in the request, and I get a response back. And I'm taking that response and I'm popping it open in another window that just shows the values just for informational purposes. But I grabbed the body of the response, and this is what I was going to refer to. The body is actually a blob, and so I'm going to, it's in UTF-8 encoded, and I'm going to convert that back to a string here. So that's just something to be aware of. This is everything I just discussed when looking on that page. So this is an example of everything you get back when you get a response back from using the request resource method. So you get a status code 200 means it worked. Anything else usually means it failed, and the status code text. And then this is just the raw JSON I got back. Now you don't have to use the new OAuth client. If you're already using the RESTClient or the HTTPClient, or if you want to use those instead, in R3 they've been modified and they take a token request, the same argument that you're passing in your access request in the OAuth client, they take that same token request object as well in the retrieve method for the REST client or from the send request method of the HTTP client. Now that may make it look like every time you do a REST client retrieve you're sending a new token request. That's not actually how it works. Because you only want to send one token request and then keep reusing it on subsequent calls, what PowerBuilder does is it actually caches the token request and the response it got. And so when you do another token request, or you don't do another token request, but you pass in another token request argument, PowerBuilder is going to look at that token request and it's going to say, do I have a matching token request that I've already got from this service? And if so, it just goes ahead and uses the token it already received rather than sending another request. So it's handling that all for you. So you populate the token request and send it in on each call, but it's only actually going to make the token request call on the first call. After that, it will just keep using the token it already received. Okay, so let's go look at a demo of that real quick. So here's my example. Do my request token. Once again, this is the key and secret values that I got when I registered my app on the Twitter website. I request a token, and that's my response. I actually got a response that quick. So this is the access token, and this is the full body of the response, but this is the pieces. So it's a bear. Here's the token. Status code 200 all work. Okay. Now I'm going to do a search on that term, and so this is what came back. A whole bunch of information about tweets on PowerBuilder. I could go change this now. I'm going to go change this to Appeon. I wouldn't do another access request. I would just do another search. And it doesn't look like there's a whole lot out there about Appeon. Let's try Elevate. There's a little bit more information. Okay, so you keep once you've got that token, you can keep making requests over and over again. You don't have to do your access request again. Let's search on Appeon without the hashtag. Yeah, we got some more results that way. So apparently, when Appeon's posting stuff, they're not putting pound in front of their name. Okay, so that's OAuth. Okay, let's go back to the slides, and actually that takes us to our question and answer session, and for that I'm going to turn things back over to Armin.